the WEC. We went to church as usual Sunday morning at Winfield Methodist Church, but I had a hard time keeping myself from yawning during the sermon. I stayed up late the night before reading Magic Squares and Cubes, and it was even better than I'd expected. Before, I'd only seen the Magic Squares with 3 or 4 rows and columns, but this book had squares with 5, 6, and 11, and even 7. It had a picture of an engraving by Albrecht Dürer that had a magic square in it too. And it even talked about how magic squares were used as talismans to protect you from harm. I closed my eyes to rest for a moment and thought about the book and Liz and talking. For a long time, I thought of myself as only speaking to 4 people: Judy, David, Daddy, and Mother, if she asked me a direct question. Then Liz came along, and things started to change. I answered math questions in Mr. Harding's class most days and squeezed out a few words to TJ. I told Miss Taylor I was going to give the presentation, had given it, and had a whole conversation with Betty Jean afterwards. I had even spoken to Pastor George. What was going on? Mother elbowed me in the ribs. I opened my eyes, and she passed me the collection basket. I was supposed to put my $1 donation inside, but I was so distracted by magic squares and talking and presentation, I forgot and just passed the basket on to the next person. Drat. At least Mother hadn't noticed. I'd put in $2 next week to make up for it. After the service came Sunday school. My teacher, Miss Winthrop, was young, a college girl, I think. She'd only been at our church for a year or 2 and was sort of annoying and amusing at the same time. She was a little on the plump side and had dimples when she smiled, which was pretty much all the time. Miss Winthrop was a glass of seltzer and had been pumped full of too many bubbles. Even if you skimmed your knee or something, she'd say, "Oh, darling, there's no need to cry," with a huge grin on her face, as if she enjoyed seeing you bleed. "I've got a Band-Aid right here in my purse. Isn't that fabulous luck?" Oh, no. I didn't think I was lucky to have tripped on a rock, and she had the Band-Aids in her purse because it was her job to bring along the first aid kit on the youth group hike. That week in Sunday school, Miss Winthrop was talking about the Apostle Peter and how he thought you should be good, kind, and loving to everyone, even if it was hard. I was thinking, okay, it's just the golden rule. Then she read a quote from 1 Peter 3:14 that caught my attention. "But even if you do suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled." That got me thinking about what Daddy had said to me in the car, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I was pretty sure Peter would say being friends with Liz was right. Daddy was the one who was wrong to be afraid. Before I could decide how I felt about that, I noticed little Jimmy was sitting across the circle, staring at me. I hadn't spoke to him since I gave him the peach pit, and well, actually, I hadn't spoke to him then either. I had a vague recollection of seeing him at Sunday school once or twice before, but he wasn't a regular like me. He was short, of course, and I'd always thought he was as bland as a glass of apple juice. His eyes seemed too big for his face, like a child's, and his cheeks were chubby, though the rest of him was skinny as a pole. I noticed he had a notebook clutched in one hand. Little Jimmy gave a small wave and smiled at me. I blushed. Did he like me? When class was over, I let the others file out first, so I wouldn't run into little Jimmy. By the time he was gone, my mother was at the door. "Miss Nisbet?" Miss Winthrop said. "It's so good to see you." "Hello, Miss Winthrop," said Mother. I do hope Marley was well behaved in class. "Oh, she's a doll, as always," Miss Miss Winthrop was the only person who ever described me as a doll. And I didn't talk in class. How much trouble did Mother think I could get into? I've been hoping to run into you, said Miss Winthrop. Oh, really? Asked Mother. Why? Some women and I have started a little group. The committee actually, and we were wondering if we could convince you to join. Mother's smile brightened. I'm always happy to do some volunteer work, and with things at school the way they are, well, let's just say I have plenty of time on my hands. Funny you mentioned the schools, said Miss Winthrop. That's what our group's about. We're calling it the Women's Emergency Committee to Open Our Schools, the WEC for short. Now, I know you are a teacher, so I was hoping you would join. Only cost $1. We'll put your name on our mailing list and you'll be informed of all our events. So what do you say? Miss Winthrop finished breathlessly. Will you join? Mother was red as she struggled to find the words. Miss Winthrop, I'm honored, but of course I want the schools to reopen. However, I'm not really sure Negroes should be going to our schools. No one need to worry about that, Miss Winthrop continued smoothly. The WEC isn't for integration or segregation, but for education. Still, said Mother, looking at the ground, I'm afraid the answer is no. Oh, all the fizz went out of Mrs. Winthrop. I hated Mother in that moment. She knew how important it was for me to have Judy come home. I thought it was important to her, too. More important than who went to school, where. After a moment, Miss Winthrop's enthusiasm bubbled back. Well, if you ever change your mind, please let me know. Mother glanced over at me. I pretended to be studying a Bible. No reason to let her know I'd been listening. Just hoped she didn't notice it was upside down. I'll meet you on the front steps, Marley, she said, and walked out. As soon as Mother was gone, I felt for the $1 in my pocket. Might as well add another name to my talkings list. I looked over at Miss Winthrop's and counted 2, 3, 5, 7 and said, I want to join. It wasn't as hard as I'd expected. Miss Winthrop looked delighted, at least until she remembered my mother had just refused. Are you sure your mother won't mind? But even if you do suffer for righteousness' sake, I said, you will be blessed. Thank you, Marley, said Miss Winthrop as she took my money. You really are a doll.